Talking to Cornelius. Conversation 24. In Tasmania, ancient is a living thing, made thick with all its accrued remembering. Eucalyptus regnans, the ruling eucalypt, straight as a sky-bound arrow, green in all seasons. A tree so great it gathers names, the way it gathers rings, marking years, then decades, then centuries. Mountain ash, swamp gum, stringy gum, Tasmanian oak. There's one in southern Tasmania called Centurion. It's now over 100 metres tall. There's another called Commandy Queen that's almost as tall. Both trees had already been growing for more than a century when Abel Tasman sighted the island in 1642. They were more than 300 years old when you returned to the island from the goldfields, old man, in 1853. They are more than 500 years old now, and they're still growing. Eucalyptus regnans is a short-lived adolescent compared to the slow and convoluted growing Lagerostrobus franklini. The sweet-scented Huon pine slowly grows on riverbanks over thousands of years. Individual trees might be aged at 3,000 years, but their branches dip and take root and rise up from a deep-rooted living continuum that can be 10,000 years old or more. Imagine that, old man, a still living thing that's continued for longer than the existence of many of the cold stone ancient artefacts of Europe. Atherosperma moscatum, southern or black heart sassafras, can live as long as 200 years in the cool wet of the south. Andopetalum biglandulosum, horizontal scrub, has no interest in height. It concerns itself with its ancient Gondwanan art of weaving a tangled, impenetrable web. Each individual in the forest plays its part within that living whole that extends from the wind-swept heights of the canopy to the dense and intricate mosses and lichens that grow in the rich decaying world of the forest floor. We look at those forests from opposite ends of a vigorous history, old man. I'd like to think we share some common moment, an initial instinct of awe at first sight of the complex magnitude of the wilderness. But then, I suspect our minds go in different directions. You arrive back in Van Diemen's Land in 1853, no longer a digger or a carter in the larger-than-life setting of Gold Rush Victoria. Those identities were now relegated to the nostalgic past. Back on the island, you were recast as a frontier man, a timber gatherer, a splitter, a small plot farmer. And the surrounding wilderness was an object of pragmatic consideration for you and your community, the source material for your future, the place where you literally wrestled and contended for your share of providence. Blue gum for shipbuilding We might have congratulated those who were doing an extensive business in the timber trade on the fact that Sir William Denison has received an order from the Lords of the Admiralty for the supply of 170 tons of blue gum and stringy bark, and, in pursuance of which, the Commissariat have called for tenders for the conveyance of the same to Woolwich Dockyard. We say we might have done so, had the cutting of the timber been left to the enterprise of private individuals. Still, it may be the means, if properly carried out, eventually of opening up an extensive and lucrative trade between this and the mother country. Our forests of timber are inexhaustible. Anyone who has visited Port Esperance, Three Hut Point or the Huon must acknowledge this to be the case. Colonial Times, Hobart, 27th of September, 1850. I can see you initially moving back to the Franklin area. You'd been married to Bridget for a year, and now you are making a new life together in a southern frontier territory that was as far from the intensity of gold rush Victoria as could be imagined. Home was a slab hut of rough hewn timber from trees you felled and sawed yourself. The timber was either braced horizontally or vertically. Cracks between the boards were sealed with a mix of straw and clay. The roughest slab huts were roofed with bark, but I imagine your roof was well shingled with timber that you split. Shingle splitting, like stave splitting on the Huon, was quite an industry in the early days, and one that needed skill, strength of arms, and accuracy of eye. Henry Eves, who lived near our home, was one of the champion axemen and shingle splitters. He would carefully choose his tree in the bush. It must be tall and straight-grained. Then, after fixing his standing bar, his axe would fly almost too fast to be watched, and soon down would crash the tree. Henry would then walk along it, kicking aside the scrub with his strong boots and sizing up with his keen eyes. Then, with his cross-cut saw, it would soon be cut into 18-inch lengths. How those iron muscles of his arms moved back and forth and rolled up and down as he worked that saw, and block after block was cut off. They were then stood on end, ready for splitting, and after spitting on his whetstone in the usual good old way, and giving a quick once-over to his shingling knife, he would begin to make the shingles fly. They were supposed to be 4 inches wide and half an inch thick, and the cutter's aim and eye were so accurate that there were very few wastes among the hundreds which soon strewed the ground. These were gathered up into bundles, 100 in each, and tied top and bottom. Then the bundles were piled onto a rough bush sledge made of saplings. It was hooked to an old horse, or more likely a bullock or two, and off it would go, tearing through the low scrub and round trees and stumps, for shingles were often cut where there was no sign of road at all. Anne Stafford Bird. Chapter 20. The Romance of the Huon River. Home would have been one large room for a while, old man. A space that functioned as kitchen, dining room, bedroom, and storeroom. Its main illumination at night would have been the flicker of firelight. Cooking facilities might have initially been no more than a cast iron pot suspended over the fire, good enough for making a stew of homegrown potatoes and maybe some roux or rabbit meat. The local economy had a fair degree of bartering. A good load of shingles could purchase pork, mutton or beef. In time, the house might have gained a standard extension, a lean-to structure out the back that was used as a kitchen or wash house. If Bridget had suffered the worst of the famine and the clearances, then all of this would have been a luxury. The warmth and security of a solid home, food on the table, land to grow produce, a husband with ready available work. But there still would have been some adjusting to this strange new country and its own peculiar noises, especially in the night. It's interesting to think of the area where you lived for nearly 3 decades. Some local historians mistakenly say Honeywood was an early name for Geeveston. You and I know better than that, old man. Honeywood and Geeveston were 2 neighbouring towns, separated by the Commandy River. There's little that remains of the old Honeywood. There is a present-day Honeywood, but that's an entirely different place in the general vicinity of Bridgewater. The history and general layout of the old Honeywood, in the hills behind today's Commandy pub, can mainly be gleaned through old newspaper articles and the family names that are still attached to roads there. It's no surprise that some of those names, such as Doody and Hill, became part of the Donnelly story through future marriages. It's also no surprise that there's a Donnelly's Road running into the hill country. It branches off Fourfoot Road and runs alongside Scott's Rivulet. If that road goes back to where you originally lived, then you and Bridget were quite secluded up in the bushy hill country, and you were well beyond any town centres. The close proximity of Fourfoot Road meant timber work would have been close at hand. Fourfoot was the width of the tramway where railway carts were loaded with timber and then drawn out of the bush by horse or bullock teams. Whether your first home was up Donnelly's Road or elsewhere in the Honeywood area, the one thing I know is that area in the hills above Commandy can genuinely be called ancestral territory.